The light at the end of the tunnel. As the darkness closes in, I find myself dragged deeper and deeper into the depths of my own subconscious until I sink through the back of my mind into an undescribable place, a featureless, directionless, timeless void that exists at the weakest point of my life. I can feel myself drifting away, surrendered to an almost imperceptible tide, carried slowly but inexorably from the world. The rest of the night unfolds in fleeting snapshots. I briefly feel my body lift up from the ground, gravity pulling at my limbs as I'm conveyed through the forest. An unknowable stretch of time later, I feel a distant burning sensation to my right. In the world I currently inhabit, only an echo of the pain reaches me, but I can tell that it was at once substantial. Unable to divine its purpose, I let the sensation fade away before descending once more into the placid darkness. When my eyes finally work themselves open, the sun is beginning to rise. Without an ounce of strength left in my body, all I can do is peer through my eyelashes, taking in the vague scene before me. I'm in the back of the Wrangler, propped up against a soft pillar of luggage. There's somebody kneeling beside me, tugging at my right shoulder. When I try to address them, I discover that my voice has withered to a spectral whisper, so frail that it hardly exists at all. Hearing my voice, the figure shuffles around and kneels before me, staring into my eyes as they slowly regain their focus. Denise had me at Rob, had to act like he was all but dead. When she came into the forest, he got free. He took the med kit into the trees. He was coming to help when he heard this awful noise. Rob seems almost insulted, and thinking back to everything I've learned about him over the course of this trip, I can see why he might be. Even in my weakened state, I can't help but laugh, though it admittedly comes out as stilted wheezing, diffusing quietly into the air. I rest my head back against the luggage. Rob tries to recover his smile, but it slips quickly from his grasp. In its absence, his features cringe into sudden, uncontrollable sadness. Rob Guthard's weathered face bursts into a heaving mess of tears. He repeats those two words as he lumbers towards me, throwing his arms around my waist and resting his head on my left shoulder. My hands feel like lead as I raise it up and brush it against his hair, holding him against me. As the man continues to sob, I let my head roll slowly to the right, observing the damage to my arm. Last night, lost in the muddled throes of shock, the harm had been unquantifiable. The details drowned out by the encompassing haze of severe blood loss and a blaring, primal alarm which had forced me to move without questioning why. Now that I'm on the other side, bathed in the quiet warmth of the Wrangler, I'm able to fully assess the extent of my injury. Everything below my right elbow is gone. It feels almost like a dream. My upper arm is practically unblemished, save for a few dark bruises from last night's fall. Yet it descends an impossibly short distance before ending in a blunt, surreal stump. The wound itself is hidden from view, swaddled in fresh white bandages. I can't seem to figure out how I should feel, and consequently, I don't seem to feel anything. Rob pulls back, his eyes still watering. I can tell Rob's offer is genuine, and to be honest, I'm a little surprised. I still remember our verbal agreement, forged at the mouth of the tunnel, that he would not be turning his car around until he reached the road's end. I never expected he'd be the one to renege on the deal. I'm aware that this could be my best chance to leave it all behind, to flee from the horrors of the road before they take even more of me. I know the way back. I know that it leads to safety, to family, to blessed normality. However, as an insidious voice in the back of my mind quietly notes, it doesn't lead to answers. Rob sends me a heartbroken smile, which I would return if I had the strength. In that moment, a somber understanding develops between us. An understanding that after everything we've seen, everything that's happened, we're both still choosing the secrets of the road. The decision reveals something about us, exposing a driving force behind our actions that negates our concern for survival and overshadows the imagined protests of our loved ones. It was a decision only two broken people would take. Rob spends the morning packing up the Wrangler, giving me time to rest. The fact that he's walking around at all is remarkable, let alone conducting his usual routine at his usual pace. As I begin to feel life crawl slowly back into my veins, I wonder whether the strange force that has sustained us both, as well as the Wrangler's fuel tank, could also have a mild restorative effect. The notion should bring me comfort. Instead, it makes me feel like a lobster in a tank. A few hours later, Rob carries me out of the car, letting me rest in the door frame. In front of me lie 3 mounds of dirt, raised slightly from the surrounding earth. 2 are headed by crosses, formed from knotted sticks bound tightly together. The grave on the far left lies bare, bereft of any religious affiliation. Rob goes to throw a foldable spade into the back of the car. For a brief moment, I consider letting his statement go unanswered. Rob immediately marches back around, his brow furrowed in confusion. I gesture to the bare grave. Rob looks like he's seeing me for the first time. As I watch my quiet assertion strike Rob's ears, as its meaning burrows through his consciousness, its implications contorting his features into a look of shame, I can tell from his reaction that I've got it right. We haven't had a chance to speak since I learned his son's name. That piece of information formed the crucial thread, stringing together the strange and seemingly incongruent discoveries I'd encountered on the road. Earlier in the week, I may have been worried to confront him with this information, but things are different now. We've come too far. We've been through too much. And if he's truly ferrying me somewhere with malicious intent, I'm powerless to stop him now anyway. I raise a weak hand towards him, a quiet request for assistance. Following a tense and guilty silence, Rob simply nods and helps me into the passenger seat. The Wrangler continues to crawl through the forest. I've stayed quiet for almost half an hour, letting Rob formulate a response in his own words and in his own time. Rob grows quiet, reluctantly accepting, that he'll have to start from the beginning. So, was it Bobby who discovered the left-right game? Rob said. He called me up one day, out of the blue. This was about 3 years ago. Said he'd found a set of rules. Said we should try out. To be honest, I thought our tripping days were over. I was back in Alabama and he was starting up a family of his own. But suddenly he's telling me to meet him in Phoenix. So of course, I went along. Bobby knew as soon as we reached the tunnel. He passed that way every day. Knew it wasn't supposed to be there, but there it was. He said that was the most amazing thing he ever saw. We charted it over the next year, whenever we could get the time together. But we moved slow, mapped the place out, turned back on the regular. It took us a while before we got the courage to stay on the road overnight. Both of us were terrified the tunnel would disappear or something. I can tell Rob is replaying the events in his head. The reminiscing almost makes him smile. Bobby's wife was a real doll. Used to work in his office. Kindest girl I ever met. Funny too. There was a decade between them, but you could tell that they were good for each other. He shared everything with her, including the road. In fact, once Bobby got a little more secure with the rules, they started to map it together, exploring their own little world. After a brief pause, Rob's expression sinks slightly. The reminiscing is growing darker. Rob takes a moment to collect himself, to put the facts in order. The trees are starting to grow thin, sunlight bursting through the widening gaps in the canopy. It looks like we're nearing the forest end. I take a moment to process Rob's implication. Suddenly, I feel a stone drop in my stomach. Rob nods solemnly. Wasn't the woman he knew, of course. Stood there all day, just mumbling about the road. Didn't even recognize him. I remember he called me up right after he saw her there, his heart breaking. He tried almost every day from then on, always stopping at the turn. He'd yell, he'd plead, he'd bring pictures and gifts, but she never responded. Don't really know if it was her, but whatever it was on that corner, it belonged to the road. Bobby lost something of himself on that corner. After a while, his fascination with the game turned sour, turned to hate. He thought the road was something evil, that it has no place linking into our world. I was checking up on him at that point, every few days or so. One weekend, he said he was doing better, even said he'd been off to work. I thought maybe things were turning around, but then he went quiet. He didn't pick up his phone for 3 days. I had my place in Phoenix by that point, and a spare key to his house. That's where I found the note, telling me he'd gone back through. One last bid to find his wife. And if he couldn't bring her back, well... We pass out of the forest, onto a long, narrow road. In the distance, I can see our route winding up a towering wall of sandstone, disappearing into a set of rolling mountains. Rob stares out at the faraway ridges, his hands grasping the steering wheel. For the second time today, Rob battles back tears. And for the second time, he fails. They roll silently down his cheek as he continues on. The road has taken almost everything from him, and then I took the rest. I denied him his hope, took away his chance to leave the world on his own terms. In the end, He didn't even seem angry. He just asked about Marjorie. Asked why she did it, why she left him. I laid him to rest there. Visited the place often, but I never had a good answer for him. And that's when I started prepping for the next run. Rob's features tighten, all his shame and guilt rising to the fore. I can't say it isn't deserved. Despite his intentions, despite his penitence, the man has blinded himself to clear dangers, hurt those closest to him, and on a road where secrets had killed so many, he kept the most significant one of all. Well, perhaps not the most significant. Rob turns to me confused. In my current state, in the mechanics of the event and their stunning implications, lie just beyond my explanatory capacity. In the end, I just raise my lost arm and wait for Rob to make the connection. A moment later, the car screeches to a halt. Rob stares straight ahead, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. I'm aware that beneath his stone-set features, every square inch of grey matter is fighting to process the fresh revelation. If it's true that, in those quiet woods, I somehow reached across the decades to a young Rob Guthard, then it changes everything. The twisting narratives that led us to that point, Rob's burgeoning obsession, his son's tragic fate, they all took root in that single moment. More than a decade prior to my own birth, I'd placed us on the path which would lead me to his door. As chaotic as the road often seems, that moment in the forest hints at something deeper, something intentional. Rob steps out of the car for a while, before wordlessly climbing back in and firing up the Wrangler. From that point on, we continue as two silent passengers, lost in thought, disappearing into the sandstone mountains. We travel across the thin mountain road for the next 2 hours, a wall of crooked rock hemming us in. When we pass on to the other side and the outcrop falls away, the landscape below us has changed completely, and we're treated to a strange and breathtaking sight. The Wrangler is traversing the cliffs above a vast, flat desert, a tundra of vibrant orange stretching as far as the eye can see. I can just make out the road, cutting a meandering path through the sand far below us. At the center of this otherwise featureless expanse, a collection of monolithic structures, towering columns of glass and metal rise from the ground, connected by a web of long, perpendicular streets. Rob keeps his eyes forward. Despite the epic majesty of the cityscape below us, I can tell that his mind is elsewhere. He's still digesting the contents of our interview. In the end, I think it's best to leave him alone with his thoughts. We stay on the mountain for another 20 minutes, before finally winding down to the desert floor. The space ahead of us is two-tone. The sharp saffron of the desert and the deep blue sky, separated by a thin, even horizon. The only objects that cross this perfect boundary are the hulking grey towers of the city, rising from the sand and bursting through into the heavens. We snake along the desert road, the city looming ever larger as we make our tentative approach towards the border. There's an eerie contrast to the threshold as we cross it. The capricious glow of the sand switches to grey, the scorching heat instantly cools, and perhaps most notably, what little sound there was is negated entirely. As we delve down an empty, perfectly maintained thoroughway, I realise that we can't hear anything at all, except for the Wrangler's steady rumblings. I wonder if he's right. It's hard to think of such a place would exist for any practical purpose. The city looks off somehow, as if it was built from conjecture by an architect who had only heard of cities through poorly translated rumours. All the broad features are present: skyscrapers, lampposts, window cleaning platforms, but nothing deeper. It's an empty shell, an ornament in the middle of the desert. As we turn down the next few roads, I stare up at the monolithic structures, each one standing at least 100 stories tall. My eyes track down to the countless strata of dark windows as I contemplate what it might be like to live in such a place. When I reach the ground floor, I'm presented with my answer. There's a young man standing at the ground floor window, his hand resting against the glass. He's wearing a dark grey suit and a look of almost mesmeric shock. His mouth wide open, his hands shaking, his unblinking eyes staring past us as the Wrangler rolls by. My eyes quickly track back up to the skyscraper's glass facade, scrutinizing each row of windows in turn. I'd naively hoped the buildings would be empty, that this place would be nothing more than a colossal ghost town. Now that I know otherwise, each pane of glass feels like a dark pool of water, still on the surface, but with sinister potential lurking within its depths. A few seconds later, more of them arrive. There aren't many at first, just a few scattered figures stepping up to their windows, pressing themselves against the glass. However, like a light sprinkling of rain that erupts into a downpour, the frequency of their arrival quickly doubles, then triples, until not a single space lies unoccupied. The Wrangler shrinks, subject to the scrutiny of countless individuals on every floor, in every window, all of them clad in the same monochromatic formal wear and staring down at us like emissaries of a grand tribunal. As the Wrangler passes by, they continue to stare straight ahead, though it's clear they're aware of our presence. Rob puts his foot down, shedding the weight of 1,000 pairs of eyes as he leaves the building behind. As the final column of windows slips us by, I glance back, hoping to see them returning to the depths of their building. Instead, in those last few moments, I witness their collective demeanour fracture into a desperate frenzy, their mouths opening in a silent scream as they slam their fists against the glass. Turning back around, I stare into the buildings that currently flank our vehicle. The figures have already arrived at the windows, and their calm is already fading. The Wrangler growls with renewed ferocity as Rob plants his foot onto the gas. We lurch towards the next corner, accelerating down the road as Rob scans for any hidden turns. I achingly shift in my seat, keeping an eye on the scene developing in our wake. Shards of broken glass begin to rain onto the asphalt. Watching the shattered pieces tumble through the air, it's apparent that the quiet in this city isn't simply due to a lack of activity. The torrent of splintered glass is completely silent, even as it crashes against the impervious ground. Nothing in this city makes a noise. Nothing except us. The thunderous engine of the Wrangler has never sounded so loud. Looking up, I witness hundreds of hands gripping the shattered window frames, unable to turn myself away as thousands of polished black shoes step over the threshold. The figures stream out from every floor, forming an incomprehensible deluge of humanity. The first wave strikes against the ground, with more and more landing against them. A heap of tangled figures struggling to separate themselves. Much like the residents of Jubilation and everyone else we've encountered on the road, they appear impervious to the fatal harm such an act should impart. Those that landed on their feet hardly even stop, running towards us and sprinting after the Wrangler. It doesn't take long for the rest of the writhing mass to resolve itself. Its constituent individuals joining the frenetic stampede, their chaotic charge and desperate screams bereft of any perceivable sound. Even in the midst of the frenzied pursuit, as a foreboding shower of glass falls from every building we pass, the world outside remains silent. The chaos made even more incomprehensible, framed against the ungodly stillness in which it takes place. Rob screeches around the corner, drifting onto a long and open street. The roadway ahead is flanked by skyscrapers, disappearing into a vanishing point. As we race down this next stretch of road towards a large intersection, the ever-growing mob bursts into the street behind us, taking the corner with supreme coordination and continuously, tirelessly going in our direction. A split second later, I'm struck by an abrupt and pervasive idea. It feels unlike any thought I've ever had before, less of a notion, and more of a prescient hybrid of intuition and deja vu, as if the course of action we must take is obvious to me, despite my not knowing why. I force my voice above a grating whisper. Rob glances into the rear view, then back to the road. I can hear the gears turning in its head. The car thunders across the tarmac as I clumsily grasp the wheel, shifting myself over and working my foot onto the accelerator. Rob lifts himself away and climbs past me into the back of the Wrangler. In my weak state, every shuddering motion makes my bones rattle. With each subsequent gear shift, I'm forced to take my remaining hand off the wheel and reach across to the stick. The effort is precarious and awkward, my aching limbs puppeteered by willpower and adrenaline. Every passing second a battle to maintain control. The windows up ahead are starting to fracture. The noise of the Wrangler is carrying, and the entire city is starting to preempt our arrival. Behind me, I can hear the ripping of duct tape, the tearing of fabric, and clattering of falling luggage. I'm not sure what's taking place behind me. I just have to trust that Rob has a plan. I hear the back door swing open just before we reach the intersection. A metallic scraping along the Wrangler's floor and a pained grunt from Rob as he throws something onto the road behind us. Reaching the crossroads, I slide my hand along the wheel and twist it sharply to the right. As the car lurches around and onto the next road, I feel my heart sink dramatically. We've been overtaken. The windows ahead of us are shattered. The front doors lay broken on the street, and the building's desperate inhabitants are rushing towards us, blocking off our only means of escape. I slam my foot onto the brake, and the Wrangler shudders to a halt, the engine stalling and cutting out. The streets are now spilling over, an overwhelming swarm converging on our position from 4 directions. I look back to Rob, and he meets my gaze, his eyes brimming with dismayed finality. An explosion shudders through the air behind us. I look out the back window to see Rob's shattered jerry can, one of the now superfluous fuel reserves, its dark green shell violently compromised, its contents spilled out across the road and cast alight. Now that the engine isn't running, the echo and blast and roar of the primal, balletic flame in the afternoon air. The trajectory of the maddening crowd changes instantaneously. The silent wrangler has fallen from their collective attention as they refocus onto the smouldering flames. Those up ahead continue to rush past us, streaming around the wrangler as they scramble to the spilled pool of gasoline, digging their hands into the blaze, grasping hopelessly at the fire. Delicately, careful not to make a single shred of noise, I climb out of the driver's seat, joining Rob in the back of the Wrangler. He addresses me in a confused whisper. I don't know how I'm so sure, but I know that it's the case. The jerry can creaks and screams as the city dwellers tear it apart into smaller and smaller pieces, frantically examining every jagged step. With every passing second, as the fire dies down, the crowd grows increasingly distressed, as if a precious commodity is slipping through their fingers. As the last of the gasoline is eaten up and the fire dies away, the city dwellers remain in the streets, devoid of their momentary sense of purpose, their prize vanishing into the ether. The crowd's desperation fades into a hushed despondency. I watch them as they pass by, countless faces racked with sorrow, their aimless shuffling forming a lonesome sea, a grayscale ocean that spans the desolate city. The Wrangler is now adrift in the center of that ocean. It's clear that any attempt to start the engine would bring the entire city down upon us, reigniting their futile hope, causing them to tear through the car and anything inside it. For the foreseeable future, we're completely stranded. In the eerie, pervasive calm that surrounds us, I sit myself down next to Rob and lean back against the wall, with nothing else to do but wait for our situation to change. After watching the figures outside for over an hour, the only thing that's different is a strange needling sensation that feels like it's emanating from my now absent forearm. Rob reaches into his medical kit and retracts a blue jar of tablets. Twisting off the cap, he shakes 2 pills free. I stare at the tablets for a moment before collecting them from his open palm. He passes me his canteen, and I swallow them down in 2 weak gulps. My brow furrows, though I'd meant to remark as a passing jibe. Rob's response rings with strange sincerity. It takes me a moment to realize why that is. I rest my head on Rob's shoulder. He gently places his arms around me. It isn't long before the medication starts to take effect, quietly overtaking my already weakened constitution. The pain subsides, dulled with the rest of my senses. The sun is still streaming through the windshield as my eyes begin to drift shut. I watch the figures pass the window, my eyelids getting weaker. The last thing I see before I fall into a dreamless, artificial sleep is Rob Guthard's hand reaching for the rifle. When my eyes work themselves open, the sun is beginning to set. I've been moved. As my vision adjusts, it becomes clear that I'm still in the Wrangler, my head resting against a pile of fresh clothes. A soft travel blanket laid across me. I glance around to find that Rob's nowhere to be seen. Momentarily forgetting the situation outside the car, I attempt to call out for him. The syllable catches in my throat as a shambling figure passes by the window, wringing its hands in despair and casting a long shadow through the car. With a renewed sense of caution, I slide the blanket to one side and slowly make my way up to the front. Except for a single scrap of paper, torn from my notebook, it lies on the driver's seat, a small object hidden within the fold. When I open it, I find my headphones and 5 neatly written words. Channel 1 to all cars. My hands start to shake as I rest the note on the dashboard, slowly climbing through and placing myself gently into the driver's seat. My heart in my throat, I insert the headphones into the jack of the CB radio, take a single quivering breath, and press the first button. I rest my head against the steering wheel and brace myself against the weight of his words. In the wake of Rob's words, in the shadow of the decision, I'm cast into silence, not because the choice is hard, but because I'm ashamed it was so easy. It was made the moment I first stepped into the Wrangler, and renewed in every perplexing moment since. The need to know, to comprehend, to uncover the truth has been with me my whole life, but I never knew its roots ran so deep, that I would have to endure so ardently when everything else, everyone else, had been stripped away. I stare into the rearview mirror, seeing myself for the very first time, and I have to admit I'm scared. The shot explodes through the radio before a faint, booming echo reaches me in the quiet city car. Its effect on the city dwellers is immediate. Their collective melancholy shatters in an instant, replaced by a renewed fixation. Before I know it, the disparate crowd unites once more into a stampeding horde, rushing past the windows of the Wrangler and back down the road towards the source of the noise. As the last of the city dwellers disappear behind me, I run my hand across the steering wheel and down to the ignition. With a fateful twist of the key, the Wrangler roars back to life. The wheels kick against the asphalt, transporting me through the streets of the city. As I barrel away from the intersection, I see a small contingent of pursuers rushing around the corner behind me. Rob fires the rifle again, maintaining the attention of the majority. The stragglers fall away in my rearview mirror, losing ground against the Wrangler. I take my first left, and then the next possible right, and then another left. A few minutes later, I eventually find myself on the last stretch of road, leading me back into the vast and empty desert. The sound of a final shot reverberates through the radio, its echo drowned out by the roaring engine of the Wrangler. The world shifts around me as I burst out of the city and back onto the desert road. The way ahead is laden with immense possibility. Yet as I disappear into the vastness of the desert, I can only think of what I've left behind. Rob J. Guthard had his flaws, marked by loss, driven by obsession, his good intentions often paving way to tragedy and heartbreak. As the tears begin to roll down my cheeks, I decide to remember him differently, as a valued friend, a good man, and above all else, a great story, no matter how you tell it.